So I'd like to welcome everyone to another segment in our series, The Power of Pivoting, Managing Through Crisis, the Hospital for Special Surgery's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Dr. Ronald McKenzie. I'm an internist and rheumatologist at HSS who has served as the moderator for these discussions. So today we have two important people to interview. I think perhaps unsung participants or heroes of the last 2 months that have to do with our information systems at special surgery. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Steve Magid, an old friend and longtime colleague of mine who is the Chief Medical Information Officer at Special Surgery, and Jamie Nelson, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at HSS. So welcome, Steve and Jamie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. It's a pleasure.
So, this one I'm going to take credit for, this session, because it occurred to me somewhere in the sequence of doing these interviews is that the information technology people obviously had a lot to do and were very, very important to the response of the institution during this period. So I want you to tell us a little bit about what took place, how did it take place, and what really was the IT department up to over the last 2 months. So maybe Steve, start.
Happy to start. That's a question that we appreciate very much, and appreciate the introduction as well. And just to let everybody else know that I am a practicing clinical rheumatologist, so I have really a sense of what happens on both ends of the spectrum, both in the IT side and the clinical side. And I liken IT to the processes and IT's existence to having air and water. It's really necessary, obviously, and most of the time you only realize you're in trouble is when it's in short supply or something goes wrong with it. When we do our work best, you don't know we're there. But the amount of work, as you implied, on a day-to-day basis is just extraordinary. And the kind of work and the speed with which we had to do it is intense really on the back end, on our end, as you perceive it and our patients perceive it and the world perceives it on the front end. Because we do recognize that we play a large role, and we appreciate, of course, that others recognize it, a large role in supporting the efforts that our frontline heroes make on a day-to-day basis. I think it's fair to say that we have spent as many sleepless hours as many of the clinicians working through weekends and through the night. The excuse me, the breadth of what has transpired and taken place in the hospital is reflected in what we had to respond to. So, for example, I'll mention some of the things and then turn it over to Jamie, but working from home, thousands of people have been migrated to work at home. Telehealth and telemedicine went from a few hundred to thousands of visits. We've transformed our hospital completely during a period of time, going from a musculoskeletal hospital, very specialized, with virtually all elective surgery, to an emergency medical hospital, to a triage unit, to ICUs. And I think we should probably go through some of these things little by little, so we can sort of give you some idea of what happened on the back end. And Jamie?
So I think Steve did a great job of really outlining the three major areas that IT had to step up and really help. And I like to think of information technology as being the wind underneath the clinicians' wings, because we know what the clinicians have to do. We're there to help power through technology so they can do things as best that they can. So we had three major areas. Number one was supporting work from home, because again, we've gone from an average of 200 people a day remoting in to 2,000 a day. And that is a significant upward. And although we had all the technology in place, we had to scale it up to really adequately support that number of people using their systems from home. Now, many of those were IT people, because we sent our folks home fairly early. We started doing an A-B rotation as we saw the pandemic hitting, because I was afraid of staff getting sick. So our staff was now remote, except for our desktop team who had to be on campus. The rest of the staff who manages Epic and PACS and all the other systems, the technologies were remote. So we had to do our significant work to support the COVID activities from home. So that's number one is remote work. Number two is really changing all the clinical workflows and some of the physical infrastructure at the hospital to turn us in from an elective hospital to this intensive care infectious disease situation. And then thirdly, as Steve mentioned, telehealth, allowing all those critical visits. You know, we had all these patients who had surgery and now we did 6-week follow-up visits and or rehab visits. These were critical to their care, and we had to have a robust telehealth solution. The good news is we had one. We had built it out for Epic. It was not that widely used yet. We were slowly, marching it out. But with the need because of the COVID-19 crisis, we were able to scale that up. So I think the real what we did here is to take an existing strong technology foundation and just move it fast and forward to meet these critical needs. And the beginning, when we were taping, somebody said we didn't want IT to be forgotten. It's hard to forget 18,000 hours that our staff put in, because we track hours against work in this time period, in this 2-month time period. And a good concentration of that 18 hours was in a 3-week time frame. So pretty amazing body of work.
Yeah.
And Jamie, how large, Steve, if I may ask, how large is the department?
160 people, give or take.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I would say that's roughly split half and half between the technology, the infrastructure people, and the applications people who managed all the software for the clinical and the business applications that we use.
Just to expound a little bit on the work from home, I think part of the key to both, well, not just work from home, but telehealth and even the kind of Zoom video we're on now had to do with the infrastructure that Jamie alluded to, that we increased the internet bandwidth tenfold, I think up to 10 gigabytes per second, which is like a super highway. Something like 400 laptops were distributed to allow people to have video conferencing, digital check requests, and all these things in the background that went on to allow people to work from home, digital signatures for check requests, signing on to Kronos, our what's the technical name for it? Timekeeping system for
check in and check out, clock in and clock out to get
Yep. And just the amount of technical detail that went into the background was extraordinary also.
And it's high pressure because it's not really in the background. People are using these systems every day. So if they can't work, if people can't get to their desktop, if they can't figure out how to clock in, if their Skype isn't working, that's front and center. So and those are things we had to jump on and really fix immediately. So very high stress, high stakes. But that's what we're here for. We're here to enable people to work, whether it's remotely or on campus. So it's part of what we do, but very pressure filled. I think the work that we were doing around transforming the hospital from being an orthopedic-based hospital, we've had Epic for 4 years, which is our main clinical system, and it's configured beautifully for orthopedic medicine and surgery. We did not have the type of workflows and configurations around beds, around critical care order sets, around hospice after visits. So there were so many things that we had to quickly work with our clinical counterparts to determine what the requirements were and how to build, configure, test these, because these aren't things that you just put in and you hope they work. There's this tremendous amount of work because they're basically patient safety issues behind using all these things. So what we were able to do that normally takes weeks and collapsed down to just a number of days was pretty significant. Maybe, Steve, you can talk about the governance changes.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I think we were most pleased with. I think we had a sense that quite clearly everybody knew what was necessary. And that was not just because we knew that. It was because it was a wonderful job from a top-down leadership point of view. It was all hands on deck. It was, we're making decisions in using agile methodology, not taking our time to map out a 2-year process or a 1-year process, but that the clinical leadership and our absolutely delighted to say how wonderfully I think it functioned from the clinical side. That was, we were able to translate that into our marching orders. And we took the same kind of approach that said, let's do the things we need to do most quickly, do them exactly on time and exactly the way it was needed. So as Jamie alluded to, we didn't have critical care COVID order sets for intensive care units. So we didn't have general admission order sets for the kinds of patients. We didn't have the kinds of medicines built into the system that the general med and COVID patients, which were decanted from New York Presby. We didn't have whole slews of different workflows when we went into this. And rather than sort of take it through the iterative governance and we went to New York Hospital and said, what do you have in your critical care order sets? We showed them to anesthesia. Anesthesia worked with us over a period of 12 hours, and it was literally 12 hours overnight. We brought it to an executive governance rather than the weekly 24 people go through each detailed governance. And we said, look, we're going to put this in and we're going to do it as best we can. And let's make sure that we iterate on it if you want changes. And iterate we did, and we're still iterating in a sense on this. But it was really a wonderful testimony to the single-mindedness of the institution and the leadership, which really, I think, trickled down in a magnificent way. And we were
what that did is that, because our resources are finite. So instead of our epic analysts who know these systems quite well, and instead of them going back and forth, well, if we want a green, no, we want a light green, dark green, instead of going back and forth with those sort of decisions, the decisions were very quickly made, so the time the analysts had were used for important configuration and testing work. Because again, we don't want to roll out an order set that could harm a patient because it's not been tested correctly and has unintended consequences. So again, instead of making everything just a certain way that somebody likes it and reconfiguring it, that all went aside, very clear directives, so we could do the more value-added work around configuration and testing before we roll these out into the hands of our clinicians. And training. Every new set of order sets or anything we did in the system, we had to have our excellent training team put together tip sheets and do just-in-time training with clinicians so they knew how to use these. So you have nurses who've not done certain things since many years, having to physically learn how to do those things and how to use the EMR to document what they were doing. So we needed to make sure that that training was precise and perfect and timely, so they would not have the system as an impediment, but actually it helped them.
I'm thinking back to Katrina when all the paper clinics died. If you had paper and you were in Katrina, you were dead in the water, literally and figuratively, right? And Oxner Clinic and others that had electronic records sort of flourished and were able to take care of their patients. They were decentralized, they were available. And not to beat a dead horse about EHRs and things, but I think it's still worth mentioning out loud. There has been such resistance to electronic records, and with good reason. I mean, they are not the easiest thing to use for clinicians. And we had huge discussions about burnout and the like just before we entered this crisis. But boy, can you imagine if we didn't have these tools at our disposal and during this crisis? And what another lesson learned for me is how important it is to have these tools, but how important it is to listen to your users and try to get them better and better. And especially, your thoughtful comments and compliments about, the ethics committee and the other tools. The only way we get it right is when we have the active engagement of people. And it's been such a blessing in a disguise to have that active engagement and to partner with our colleagues. And so this is another important lesson that I learned, that it's really important to partner and listen and get it right. So.
And to have the willingness to try tools. I think, just in closing about telemedicine, how we went from a couple of docs, a bunch of, I think they were nursing coordinators after visits, doing telemedicine visits, to hundreds of PTs and physicians using this tool, which once they tried it, it really actually worked well. So I think having a willingness to get out of anybody's comfort zone, our own comfort zones, and try some of these tools, whether they're collaboration tools, telemedicine, it's something we're going to have to do. That will be the new normal. So I think HSS is off to a running start in that.
I can personally, Steve and Jamie, reinforce some of those comments in that, I was actively engaged with the ethics committee. And we had a very large volume of consultations. I would say in a matter of a few weeks, we had done more than we had certainly done in the preceding year. And, communicating the content of those discussions with families and so on became really very important and quite urgent. And we did not have a mechanism by which to do that, other than to add it as a note, for instance, in Epic, but it really wasn't identified as a bioethics note and so on. It really took one conversation with the IT people and a little direction as to what the content and structure of that note would be. And we had it within, I would say, a matter of a few hours. Certainly within one day, we had the mechanism that we needed in order to communicate with the staff. And not only did it facilitate our work greatly, I think it was just a testament to the efficiency of your respective department. It really was kind of remarkable how quickly that got accomplished. And
I thank you for that.
By the way, it didn't need fixing.
I've got another excellent example. I happened to be in the hospital a Sunday when this was all going on, and I was rounding, and I bumped into Doug Paget, who said, "Oh, Jamie, we need to have something in the system that tells us the COVID status of the patient really clearly, red positive, yellow pending, green negative." And I said, "Okay, this is Sunday afternoon." I go back, I email my team. Monday, we had it in production. Now, normally, Steve, what, 2-3 weeks easily?
Weeks. Yeah.
So
but
to get that kind of important requirement from a clinician directly, this is what we need, this is how I want it, for us to turn around that quickly and get it through the proper approval, so we weren't putting things in that one way.
So, Jamie, as you mentioned, the kind of speed with which we were able to bring that into production, we didn't shortcut on the complexity of, is it the right thing? When does it turn yellow? Who turns it yellow? Is it automatically turned yellow? And although these things were done really quickly, we did not take shortcuts. It was just that everybody was so focused. And this is the real interesting part of it to me. As we come out of it, there's a tension to bring it back to the old normal and not the new normal. And that's natural. And the trick is to figure out how to leverage what we did learn about this. One of the things, we're a hospital of unbelievably talented individuals who frequently act as individuals, right? We all wear HSS patches and bleed HSS blue, but there's still an enormous individuality amongst our clinicians, and also the individuality from service to service. A foot and an ankle is different than a spine. Here it was all COVID all the time, but yet still foot is different than spine service, and there are differences. The question is, how do we make use of what we learned so that as the intensity and the horror and the pathos of the pandemic slow down, how do we take those lessons learned and apply it? And part of it is operational. Part of it is the lessons we've learned in operations to say, wait a minute, I see a new integrated way of doing things. There is an institutional need above less granular needs. So I think part of this is going to be the way our leaders respond, and which will allow us to respond similarly. And it's a very interesting and thought-provoking subject. I'd actually like to throw it back to you, Ron. What was your sense of when you reflect on what I'm asking and talking about?
Well, that example really brought it home to me just how efficiently and your system was working. I had a minor uh, request made to Jamie directly that I got to her actually. So I had for some time been irritated that I could not print off of my iPhone to a printer. Okay, and actually I find that an extremely useful application. And I said this time I need it, and I get to the top. I get Jamie, who undid that for me. I hope you're not going to go back to the old way. But it just showed you, that was a pretty minuscule, I think, request in the scheme of things. Not so much to me, but writ large.
Well, actually, if you remember, I emailed you back that not only did we undo it for you, we undid it for everybody.
No, I knew that. I knew I wasn't that special.
Now you are. Your request precipitated us taking a relook at something we put in and said, you know what? We really don't think that this constraint is required, and especially at this point where people are going to be home much more frequently, we can't stop clinicians from being able to do this. So we use that suggestion as, okay, why not? Let's just go ahead and do it. And that's, as Steve said, we want to keep this going forward. These are the lessons we're learning, and we want to be able to because we're going to have to do more with less for a while. So we want to really be able to capitalize on these strengths.
Yeah. I'm thinking as we're talking of another example, and I mean, these are examples amongst hundreds, because I think everybody who had any playing any role, and that was most everybody, during this period of time could probably cite examples about how effective IT was. But there was also, I participated in this family communications team, and which we've interviewed here in this series, the principles of that. But for the audience, I suppose, who may not have seen that installment, this was a group of individuals who were assigned to interact with patients' families. These were the patients that were primarily in the intensive care unit and on ventilators, to provide, to be a sort of medical liaison to the family, to keep them apprised of what was happening with their loved one. And that was another, and actually somewhat perhaps more complex even than the bioethics request was, because it involved even more individuals. But an effort that was put together in really just breakneck speed. I think from its inception to actually having a platform to do it was a matter of a couple of days. And then it was working again right from the beginning, and proved to be, I think, another very special response on the part of special surgery during this period. But IT can take a lot of credit for that.
Thank you. We do have an amazing team. And again, back to what I've said a few times, our team was so grateful to be able to contribute in a meaningful way to this pandemic. We are not clinicians. We do have clinicians on the team, but we're not practicing clinicians. So when you see something of this magnitude hitting our city and our colleagues and loved ones, to be able to actually contribute and do something, Ron, was so meaningful to all of us. So it was a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, a lot of stress, but again, being able to actually do something to contribute to saving some of these lives and making our clinicians' lives better was pretty powerful.
Well, you certainly did that, and your staff should really should know that. Now I have another question. Maybe I could have opened with this. That has to do really with how you structured your efforts. So you had some sort of command center kind of function there, I believe. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how that was put together.
Well, I am blessed to have a very strong senior leadership team. Steve is one of, on the leadership team, the CMIO. I have Elizabeth Perlman, who heads applications, Sherrod Walla, who heads technology, Vic Aurora, who heads cybersecurity, Nubu Steele has all data analytics, and Karen Cohen, who runs help desk, project management, business function. So this is my core leadership team. And we had daily meetings to start thinking about what we needed to do. We started to keep a little project management list of all the requests that were coming in, because we knew that this was going to get very big, very fast, and we had to have some structure around it. So we had our own leadership huddles. We had daily huddles with the people who were managing each of the major efforts that we've been discussing from the next layer. So we could all speak together, and actually having tools like Skype and Zoom were very, very useful because it brought us all together. So those are really, really important that we spoke on a daily basis. I think my leadership team in the beginning was speaking twice a day.
Yeah, twice a day.
So, and the hospital had a command center, so we were certainly getting information from them as well. And then I had been on the executive level teams that Lou Shapiro was chairing. So there was this cascading of information through our teams in the backup, which I think was very, very useful.
We've always been blessed by extraordinarily close collaboration in person amongst between IT and clinicians, in that we have a seat at virtually all the tables that there had been in conference rooms, and we're a little more disjointed now, and it takes a bit more effort, I think, since we're situated remotely we're all situated remotely, to make sure that this collegiality and interdisciplinary fertilization continues. And that's another one of these lessons learned, is that you don't have to be physically together to be together. It's really more of a mindset to bring people together. And when you're physically apart, it takes perhaps more purposeful thought to accomplish it. But it's more efficient. You don't have to wait for the elevator to get to the conference room. You can get you don't have to necessarily spend 2 or 3 hours commuting a day to get to a meeting. And so we have all sorts of opportunities in a very thoughtful way to maintain this collegiality where we're participating with each other. I think that's really important. Also, as an offshoot, just one other thing about the methodology. Sometimes methodology is really important. Other times it's not so important. But I'm thinking of the project management tool that we've started to use, which is called Monday.com. So Jamie was alluding to project. We had this project management tool now probably has 300 line items, and each one expands the length of the room or any Excel sheet you can envision, and has comments and participation by almost every member of every team on every line item. And my understanding is that operations is now, many people in operations are not necessarily clinicians, but out in the hospital are using similar tools. And the medium is a message sometimes. Sometimes having a tool that brings people together really reinforces the most important things. It's not really the tool, it's about what the tool accomplishes. And I kind of think that's another lesson learned. There have been a long time we've discussed in the institution, and some senior leaders have been against project management because it gets in the way. And I understand that point of view, but it's really interesting to see how it can be, if intuitive and used properly, a really great tool to govern by and share the understandings of governance. And I think that's another thing that happened with us. We put in a tool that is so intuitive that people just used it and really prospered by it. We know, or I know, that telemedicine doesn't work for everybody, and I know that you know that I know. And you just need the broad options to make it best for the right person and the right tool at the right time. And so I think we should be very cognizant that there's a spectrum of practitioners on both ends, and we can accommodate them all and maximize their experience. So anyway, thank you, Ron.
The biggest index of your success is I did several telemedicines today. So if I'm
Excellent.
in it, you've certainly done something right.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
And I bet your
Thank you.
patients love it. Love
Well,
coming
actually,
in
you
to
know what?
see
I
you.
like it, and I think they like it too.
Sure.
I mean, you have to be a little careful about, how far you stretch the model, but I think everybody's relatively, savvy about that.
And in today's circumstances, it's an excellent tool to use.
Well, I think it's fair to say we did, I think, prosper as a consequence of both of your efforts and all of your staff members. And I think, listen, this has been really an engaging discussion. I'm just so pleased that you both came to do this. And
Appreciate it.
I think that you're right, Steve and Jamie. It's going to be very, very impactful going forward in terms of how we do things in the future. I think it has changed forever, and it's been greatly facilitated by the methodologies that both of you have created for us at Special Surgery.